The heart of this message begins with understanding the divine authority placed inside the believer's mouth, and expanding this truth requires more than a simple statement. It requires revelation. When a person declares, "I speak millions," they are stepping into a spiritual law that has existed since the beginning of time. God himself set this law in motion when he spoke creation into being. He didn't form the world with his hands. He shaped it with his words. In the same way, we are designed to function through spoken faith. The tongue is not merely a physical organ. It is a spiritual instrument. And when it is used in alignment with the Word of God, it becomes a creative force that unlocks what the natural mind cannot comprehend. To speak millions is not to chase numbers, but to activate a realm of abundance that already exists in God's plan for his children. Heaven is not struggling. Heaven is not rationing. Heaven is not calculating based on earthly budgets. Every promise God made carries the DNA of overflow, and the believer accesses that overflow through bold confession. When you speak millions, you are not lying, exaggerating, or wishing. You are agreeing with the abundance that heaven has already sanctioned. You are positioning yourself to receive what is spiritually present, but not yet physically manifested. The natural world responds to words, whether positive or negative. Many people unknowingly sabotage their own blessing by speaking lack, defeat, fear, and limitation. They say, "I can't afford that. Nothing ever works for me. I never get opportunities," and their life adjusts itself to match those declarations. But the believer who understands spiritual authority refuses to let circumstances dictate confession. They rise above feelings and facts to speak what God has said. When they declare, "I speak millions," they are releasing faith into the atmosphere, allowing the unseen to take shape. That declaration is not about instant manifestation. It is about maintaining a spiritual posture that consistently calls abundance into alignment. Speaking millions also means speaking life into every area where the enemy has tried to plant scarcity. Millions of ideas, millions of pathways, millions of mercies, millions of solutions that come not from human calculation, but from divine orchestration. It means understanding that God is able to multiply the small, breathe on the insignificant, and transform the ordinary into overflow. The power is not in the complexity of the statement, but in the faith behind it. Even a simple phrase spoken with conviction becomes a seed that produces after its kind. Words are seeds, and faith is the soil where they take root. The harvest, whether spiritual or material, begins with what is spoken. Faith-filled speech is not optional. It is foundational. When a believer opens their mouth with authority, heaven listens, angels respond, and mountains shift. This is why the declaration must be firm, unwavering, and continuous, regardless of what the natural eye sees or doesn't see. To speak millions is to speak against the current of natural reasoning, because faith never waits for permission from circumstances. Faith is not polite. It does not ask the situation whether it is allowed to change. Faith steps forward, takes authority, and declares the end from the beginning with full expectation that what is spoken must come to pass. When a believer says, "I speak millions," they are refusing to be intimidated by the sight of lack or the sound of opposition. They are anchoring themselves in the truth that spiritual laws override natural limitations. The natural eye may only see the present, but faith sees the future already formed. The mind may try to calculate how God will do it, but faith never asks how. Faith simply agrees with what God has already promised. This kind of declaration is not rooted in wishful thinking or emotional hype. It is rooted in the character of God, who has shown throughout Scripture that He specializes in multiplying what seems insufficient. When He took 5 loaves and 2 fish and fed thousands, He wasn't merely solving a temporary problem. He was demonstrating the nature of divine supply. When He instructed prophets to speak to dry bones, barren fields, or empty vessels, He was revealing that words carry power in the spiritual realm long before results appear in the natural one. Speaking millions aligns the believer with this divine pattern. It shifts the focus from what is humanly possible to what is divinely guaranteed. Every time that declaration is released, it reinforces the truth that God is not limited by statistics, backgrounds, economies, or circumstances. He operates in the realm of abundance, and those who walk by faith must learn to speak from that realm, not from the realm of restriction. When someone declares, "I speak millions," they are making a deliberate choice to elevate their confession above fear, doubt, and negativity. Fear speaks from what is missing. Faith speaks from what is promised. Doubt speaks from the past. Faith speaks from the future. Negativity echoes the present. Faith prophesies what is coming. This is why spiritual maturity requires disciplined speech. It means refusing to speak defeat even when defeat looks likely. It means resisting the urge to complain even when delay seems long. It means speaking increase when everything around suggests decrease. Confession becomes not only a weapon but a spiritual lifestyle. The more consistently it is practiced, the more powerfully it works. Speaking millions also stretches the capacity of the believer to expect bigger, think broader, and believe deeper. It trains the spirit to receive more than the mind can imagine. It pulls the believer out of the mindset of survival and into the mindset of overflow. It teaches the heart to trust God's magnitude rather than man's limitation. And as this internal expansion takes place, doors begin to open, opportunities begin to emerge, and divine favor begins to arrange circumstances in ways that no human planning could produce. The words we speak set the boundaries of what we can receive, and speaking millions removes those boundaries, allowing God to fill the measure of our faith without restriction. To speak millions is to understand that your words are not just sounds released into the air. They are spiritual assignments sent into motion. Every declaration becomes a force, a seed, a command that begins shaping the unseen realm long before you see any shift in the natural. When you say, "I speak millions," you are giving your spirit permission to rise above the limitations of your environment. You are instructing your mind to agree with faith instead of fear. You are positioning your life to receive what God has already made available. The phrase is not meant to be a slogan. It is meant to be a spiritual stance. It is a reminder that God has placed creative power inside your mouth, and what you consistently speak will eventually reveal itself in your reality. Speaking millions challenges the believer to stop reacting to life and start creating according to spiritual truth. Many people go through life responding to circumstances, adjusting their expectations based on what they see, and shrinking their faith to match their situation. But the believer who understands the authority of confession does the opposite. They speak first and let circumstances adjust later. They speak increase even when decrease is all around. They speak open doors even when every door appears closed. They speak restoration even when everything seems lost. This kind of speech is not denial, it is dominion. It is the refusal to let temporary conditions silence eternal promises. It is standing firm in the truth that spiritual authority is not given to describe life, but to direct it. When you speak millions, you confront every internal voice that tries to restrict your expectations. There are voices of doubt that whisper you are asking for too much, voices of insecurity that question whether you are worthy of abundance, voices of past experiences that insist nothing will change. But faith does not argue with these voices. Faith overrides them. Faith speaks louder, stronger, and more consistently than fear. Every time you declare, "I speak millions," you are silencing the echo of limitation and amplifying the sound of divine possibility. You are training your inner world to align with God's abundance rather than the scarcity of past experiences. You are cultivating a spiritual environment inside yourself where miracles can take shape. Speaking millions also activates spiritual momentum. Words spoken in faith begin to gather opportunities, favor, resources, and divine connections. They draw what is needed into your life like a magnet. Just as negative speech repels blessing and attracts struggle, faith-filled speech attracts the supernatural intervention of God. There is movement in the Spirit when faith speaks. There is alignment happening behind the scenes. There are doors being prepared, paths being cleared, and provision being arranged. All of this begins with the authority of the spoken word. The believer who speaks millions is not waiting for circumstances to change before they believe. Their belief is what initiates the change. Their declaration is the catalyst that triggers divine activity. Speaking millions means speaking with expectation, confidence, and persistence. It means declaring abundance when your hands are empty and declaring breakthrough when nothing looks different yet. It means refusing to let silence become your response to challenges. Words create momentum, and momentum creates manifestation. The more boldly and consistently you speak millions, the more your life becomes aligned with the flow of God's abundance. To speak millions is to recognize that heaven is waiting for the believer's voice to activate what God has already prepared. In the spiritual realm, nothing moves until something is spoken. God designed it this way from the beginning. He spoke, and creation responded. He declared, and the universe aligned itself with his words. When a believer declares, "I speak millions," they are stepping into that same divine pattern of releasing faith into the atmosphere and allowing spiritual forces to begin arranging what is necessary for manifestation. It is not about forcing God to act. It is about agreeing with what He has already willed and allowing your words to open the door for His abundance to enter your reality. Speaking millions requires boldness because it challenges the norms of limited thinking. The natural world teaches people to measure everything, to expect only what seems reasonable, and to fear the possibility of disappointment. But faith never grows inside the borders of human logic. Faith expands only when it is stretched beyond comfort, beyond predictability, and beyond what the mind can calculate. The one who speaks millions is not relying on their own resources, but on the limitless supply of heaven. They are not looking at what they have, but at what God can multiply. They are not speaking from the pressure of their circumstances, but from the promise of their covenant. This mindset frees the believer from the smallness that life tries to impose. Speaking millions also awakens spiritual authority. Many believers live far beneath their potential because they have allowed their circumstances to speak louder than their faith. They repeat the language of defeat, lack, and uncertainty without realizing that they are strengthening the very conditions they want to escape. But when a believer takes responsibility for their words and begins to speak abundance, increase, and divine supply, something shifts on the inside. Their spirit grows stronger, their faith gains momentum, and their mindset becomes aligned with victory rather than struggle. They begin to see possibilities where they once saw obstacles. They begin to expect opportunities where they once expected decline. The authority in their voice grows because they are no longer speaking from emotion but from revelation. The declaration, "I speak millions," is not only about addressing external situations, it is also about transforming the inner world. Every person carries internal ceilings, mental limits, formed by past failures, upbringing, environment, and negative experiences. These ceilings define what a person thinks they can achieve or receive, but spoken faith breaks internal ceilings. Each declaration of millions pushes those limits higher, teaching the spirit to hope bigger, believe greater, and expect more than what seems possible. Internal transformation always precedes external change. When the heart becomes enlarged with faith, the life begins to reflect that expansion in visible ways. Speaking millions also sets the believer in agreement with divine timing. Sometimes the manifestation of abundance requires preparation, alignment, or maturity that the believer may not yet have. But speaking millions keeps the heart engaged, the faith active, and the expectation alive while God works behind the scenes. It prevents weariness from settling in. It keeps the believer connected to the promise even when the process feels long. Words sustain faith when emotions fluctuate and circumstances shift. The declaration becomes a steady signal sent into the spiritual realm, keeping the believer aligned with the flow of God's provision. To speak millions is to walk in a continual awareness that divine abundance is not an event but a flow, and the believer's words determine whether they stand inside that flow or outside of it. When you say, "I speak millions," you are not simply making a hopeful statement. You are positioning your mouth as a channel through which God's increase can be released. The spiritual realm responds to consistency, and your repeated declaration forms a pattern of expectation that shapes your mindset, your atmosphere, and eventually your reality. Speaking millions trains your spirit to stay aligned with the possibilities of God rather than the limitations of the natural world. It keeps your faith activated, your vision elevated, and your spirit alert to the opportunities that God sends. Speaking millions also confronts the spirit of small thinking that tries to limit what you believe God can do. Many people grow up hearing messages of limitation, surrounded by environments that condition them to expect only enough to survive. They internalize ceilings without realizing it, and those ceilings follow them into adulthood. But when a believer begins to declare abundance, those internal ceilings start to break. The more they speak, the more they stretch their imagination, and the more they become capable of receiving greater things. Abundance cannot enter a heart that has been trained only to expect the minimum. Speaking millions expands that capacity. It enlarges the internal space where faith is stored. It prepares the believer to handle more, expect more, and walk in more. Speaking millions is also a discipline. It means speaking faith, even when the natural world contradicts everything you declare. It means opening your mouth in confidence when your situation looks empty, your resources look limited, and your surroundings offer no visible evidence of increase. This discipline strengthens spiritual muscles. It teaches perseverance, consistency, and steadiness. Speaking millions becomes an act of trust, a demonstration that you believe what God promised more than what you see. It shifts your identity from a person waiting for provision to a person walking in divine authority. Your words become declarations of who you are, not merely requests for what you want. Each confession becomes a reminder to your spirit that you were created for abundance, not scarcity. Speaking millions also opens your eyes to the creative strategies that God releases. Increase does not always appear in the form of money. Sometimes it appears as ideas, insights, opportunities, divine connections, or unexpected doors. When your confession is aligned with abundance, your perception becomes sharpened to recognize these moments. You begin to see possibilities that others overlook. You begin to discern God's fingerprints in places where others see nothing unusual. Speaking millions tunes your spirit to the frequency of divine creativity. It pulls you into alignment with the solutions that heaven is preparing. Speaking millions carries an atmosphere. Words create an environment around your life, an environment of expectation, hope, and supernatural possibility. People who speak faith attract movement, favor, and acceleration. They walk with a sense of momentum because their confession continually pushes them forward. They do not stagnate because their words refuse to let them stand still. The declaration becomes a spiritual force that keeps them aligned with progress and growth. Speaking millions builds an atmosphere where miracles feel natural, where breakthrough becomes normal, and where increase is expected rather than surprising. To speak millions is to refuse to let silence be the response when life applies pressure. Silence may feel safe, but silence is agreement with whatever the situation decides. When the believer opens their mouth and declares, "I speak millions," they interrupt the cycle of defeat that tries to settle into their life. They break the momentum of fear before it can take root. They prevent discouragement from forming a stronghold. Speaking millions forces the atmosphere to shift because words carry authority that emotions do not. Emotions fluctuate, but spoken faith remains steady. Emotions weaken under pressure, but the word of faith grows stronger the more it is exercised. Speaking millions anchors the heart in expectation and prevents the believer from drifting into spiritual passivity. Speaking millions challenges the spirit to rise above the limitations of the senses. What you see, hear, or feel may suggest restriction, but what you speak determines your direction. The natural realm delivers information, but the spiritual realm responds to declaration. A person may see lack, but when they speak millions, they are announcing that lack will not define their future. They may feel pressure, but when they speak millions, they are declaring that pressure will not determine their outcome. They may hear negativity, but when they speak millions, they are aligning themselves with divine truth rather than human opinion. This shift allows the believer to operate from a higher perspective, one that refuses to be confined by temporary circumstances. Speaking millions is also an act of spiritual resistance. The enemy thrives in environments where people remain silent, defeated, or uncertain. He does not fear feelings, but he fears faith. He does not retreat from emotion, but he retreats from confession. When you speak millions, you are pushing back against every form of spiritual resistance designed to shrink your expectation. You are dismantling the lies that tell you that increase is for others but not for you. You are tearing down the internal structures that try to convince you that you must settle for whatever life hands you. Speaking millions becomes a battle cry, a declaration that you refuse to bow to scarcity or limitation. Speaking millions is not only about declaring abundance but preparing for it. Your words begin to shape your mindset into one that can handle increase responsibly. You start thinking differently, making decisions differently, planning differently, and expecting differently. People who speak millions walk with a sense of readiness because their confession trains them to anticipate movement. They start acting like someone who is expecting doors to open, not someone who is waiting for permission to succeed. They begin to position themselves for opportunities because their spirit has been conditioned to expect them. Speaking millions cultivates gratitude before the blessing arrives. Gratitude is not just a response to what you receive. It is a posture that prepares the heart to receive more. When a believer continually speaks abundance, they begin noticing small signs of increase everywhere. They become grateful for the progress seen and the progress unseen. Gratitude fuels faith, and faith fuels confession. This cycle keeps the believer in alignment with the flow of divine provision. Speaking millions establishes a lifestyle of forward momentum. It keeps the believer from growing stagnant or complacent. It compels the heart to continue believing, the mind to continue expanding, and the spirit to continue expecting. The moment the declaration stops, stagnation begins. But as long as the believer keeps their confession alive, the possibilities remain open, the atmosphere remains charged, and the spirit remains engaged.